A frightened little girl found peace in the one man everyone overlooked, a humble maintenance worker named Caleb Brooks. As her powerful CEO mother searched for answers, she uncovered a father carrying unbearable grief, an old yellow flashlight with a hidden promise, and a heart that quietly protected everyone around him. But when a dangerous secret buried beneath the building threatened countless lives, Caleb faced a choice that would reveal who he truly was. This is a story about quiet courage, unseen sacrifice, and why the people who save us are often the ones we never stop to thank. The hallway outside maintenance was too bright for midnight, its white walls and polished tile washed in fluorescent light. Vanessa Reed stepped from the elevator with her phone still at her ear, finishing a call about storm damage. Then she stopped. Her 10-year-old daughter was asleep on a vinyl chair beside the maintenance door. Sophie's cheek rested against a dark work jacket draped over her shoulders. Caleb Brooks sat nearby, his work boots wet from the snow. A dented yellow flashlight lay beside his hand. Vanessa ended the call. "Sophie?" The girl stirred. Caleb rose carefully. "Ms. Reed, she's all right." Vanessa crossed the hall and knelt. "Why are you down here? Where's Marissa?" Sophie blinked at her, then saw Caleb. Instead of reaching for her mother, she slipped from the chair and grabbed his hand with both of hers. The gesture struck Vanessa like an alarm. "Sophie," she said, too sharply. The child held tighter. Caleb looked down at her. "Your mom's here." Sophie shook her head. Every security rule and custody warning crowded Vanessa's thoughts. Caleb was a maintenance technician. Sophie had never mentioned him at home, yet she stood beside him as if he were the only safe person in the building. Vanessa signaled to her assistant. "Take Sophie upstairs." "No." Sophie's voice cracked. "He didn't do anything." "That's enough." The assistant led her away, but Sophie kept looking back until the elevator doors closed. Vanessa turned to Caleb. Inside. The maintenance room smelled of metal, dust, and burnt coffee. Tools hung in careful rows. On the workbench sat the yellow flashlight, its paint worn thin around the switch. Faint handwriting showed beneath the scratches. Vanessa faced him. "Why does my girl love you?" Caleb did not answer. His eyes moved to the flashlight. His jaw tightened, and grief crossed his face so suddenly that Vanessa's anger faltered. "What happened between you and my daughter?" He opened his mouth, but the door swung inward. Raymond Pike entered with 2 security officers and a folder under his arm. "Caleb Brooks, you're suspended pending investigation into unauthorized contact with Ms. Reed's daughter." Caleb did not argue. One officer reached for his badge. Vanessa waited for a denial, an explanation, anything. Caleb placed the badge beside the yellow flashlight. Then he looked at her with wet, exhausted eyes. "She was scared, ma'am," and everyone else kept walking. The words settled over the room like fresh snow, quiet but impossible to ignore. Vanessa searched his face for anger, for an excuse, for the practiced confidence of someone trying to escape blame. She found none, only exhaustion. Raymond cleared his throat. "Security will escort Mr. Brooks from the building." Caleb gave a small nod. He reached for the worn flashlight, but one of the officers gently placed a hand over it. "I'm sorry," the officer said. "It stays here until the investigation is complete." For the first time, something flickered across Caleb's face. Not fear, not frustration, loss. His fingertips rested lightly on the scratched metal for a brief second before he let his hand fall away. Vanessa noticed it. Out of everything on that cluttered workbench, The old flashlight was the only thing he seemed unwilling to leave behind. "Mr. Brooks," Raymond continued, opening his folder, "effective immediately, you're prohibited from contacting Ms. Reed's daughter while this review is underway." Caleb remained silent. He slipped off his work gloves and folded them carefully into the pocket of his jacket, as though even now he refused to leave disorder behind. Outside the room, the maintenance corridor buzzed with whispers. Employees had already noticed the security officers. 2 nurses paused near the vending machines. A janitor stopped pushing his cart. Someone quietly asked, "Isn't he the guy who fixed Mrs. Donnelly's heater on Christmas Eve?" Another answered, "Yeah. What could he possibly have done?" Raymond ignored them. "This company takes professional boundaries very seriously." Before Caleb could respond, the elevator doors slid open. "Dad!" The voice echoed through the hallway. 9-year-old Zoe Brooks hurried toward him, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She froze the moment she saw the security officers. "What's happening?" Caleb forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Peanut. You're off work already?" "Looks like I am." She looked from his face to the badge lying on the table, then to the flashlight, then back again. "You forgot your light." Caleb glanced toward the workbench. "I'll get it later." Something about those words sounded wrong. Even Zoe noticed. "You never leave it behind." Before she could ask another question, Loretta Brooks appeared from the lobby entrance, leaning carefully on her cane. "I've got her," she said softly. Her eyes met Caleb's for only a moment. She immediately understood that something had gone terribly wrong. Vanessa watched the quiet exchange. No panic, no dramatic protests. Just a family trying to stay steady while the ground shifted beneath them. As Loretta placed a gentle hand on Zoe's shoulder, the little girl looked back one last time. "Dad?" "Yeah. You're still coming to the science fair next week, right?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He swallowed hard before forcing another smile. "I promised you." Zoe smiled with complete confidence. "Okay." She believed him without hesitation. As they disappeared down the hallway, Caleb stood motionless. Raymond picked up the yellow flashlight and slipped it into an evidence box along with Caleb's ID badge. The lid snapped shut. Vanessa couldn't explain why the sound unsettled her. It was only an old flashlight. Yet the look on Caleb's face made it seem as though something far more precious had just been taken away. And for reasons she couldn't understand. Her daughter had looked at that same flashlight earlier that evening as if it meant the world. 6 weeks earlier. Long before the questions. Long before the suspension. Before anyone inside Reed Residential Care had noticed the quiet maintenance technician who always seemed to be exactly where someone needed help. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:10 a.m. Caleb Brooks reached over before it could wake anyone else. His small brick house on Cleveland's east side was still wrapped in darkness. The old furnace humming against the February cold outside. He moved through the kitchen with practiced rhythm. Coffee brewed while oatmeal simmered on the stove. Lunches were packed before sunrise because mornings were the only part of the day that ever felt predictable. "Dad?" "I'm here, Peanut." 9-year-old Zoe shuffled into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and carrying a stack of construction paper. "I couldn't sleep." Caleb smiled. "Science fair?" She nodded. "My bridge keeps leaning. We'll fix it tonight. You promise?" "I promise." She accepted the answer with the complete faith only a child could have. Across the hall, another door opened. Loretta Brooks stepped carefully into the kitchen, one hand resting on her cane. "You've been up too long already," she said. "So have you." She laughed softly. "I raised you. I know stubborn when I see it." Caleb placed her morning medication beside a glass of water before she even asked. Every bottle sat in perfect order, labeled with colored stickers so neither of them could mistake the schedule. "You don't have to do all this," Loretta whispered. "I know." "But you always do." He only shrugged. Outside, snow dusted the sidewalks while the neighborhood slowly woke. Delivery trucks rumbled past aging duplexes. A city bus hissed to a stop on the corner beneath flickering streetlights. Caleb drove the same aging pickup he had owned for years. The heater groaned louder than it warmed, but Zoe still waved happily through the window before running into school. "Love you, Dad." "Love you more." By 7:30, he had pulled into Reed Residential Care. The campus looked more like a private resort than a senior living community, with stone buildings, glass walkways, and carefully trimmed evergreens standing against the winter sky. Inside, Caleb changed into his work shirt and collected his tool bag. Tucked carefully into the side pocket sat an old yellow flashlight, its paint chipped from years of use. One of the younger maintenance workers spotted it immediately. "You know those things cost like $15 now," he joked. "Why don't you buy a new one?" Caleb zipped the pocket closed. "This one still works. It barely lights up. It lights enough." Before the conversation could continue, a nurse hurried toward them. "Mr. Jenkins lost heat again." "I'm on my way." No complaint, no sigh, just steady footsteps down another hallway. Later that morning, Caleb repaired a loose wheelchair ramp that wasn't even on his work order. He replaced a resident's broken cabinet hinge before lunch, because she couldn't open it herself. He tightened a loose handrail outside the chapel after noticing an elderly veteran hesitate on the steps. None of those jobs earned overtime. None of them appeared on the maintenance schedule. Raymond Pike watched from the second-floor balcony. "You spend too much time on favors," he called down. Caleb looked up. They needed fixing. They weren't assigned. They're fixed now. Raymond shook his head. "You'd make a decent supervisor if you stopped acting like everyone's personal handyman." Caleb smiled politely. "I'd rather leave the place safer than I found it." Raymond walked away without another word. As Caleb bent to gather his tools, his phone vibrated once. A missed call. He checked it immediately. Only a reminder from Zoe's school about the upcoming science fair. He released a quiet breath, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and rested his hand for a brief moment on the old yellow flashlight. One of the nurses noticed. "You never go anywhere without that thing, do you?" Caleb looked at the worn metal before answering. "No." "Must be special." His eyes lingered on the faded scratches along its side. "There are some lights," he said quietly. "You don't replace." He picked up his toolbox and headed deeper into the building, unaware that before the week was over, a frightened little girl would walk into his life carrying fears no wrench or screwdriver could ever repair. Wednesday arrived with freezing rain tapping against the tall glass windows of Reed Residential Care. The executive conference room buzzed with voices as department heads prepared for a quarterly audit. Outside, assistants hurried between offices carrying binders and laptops while maintenance crews quietly worked around them, careful not to interrupt the polished rhythm of the building. Caleb was replacing a faulty emergency exit sensor when his radio crackled. "Routine fire alarm test in 5 minutes," dispatch announced. He acknowledged the message and tightened the last screw. Across the building, a black SUV rolled beneath the covered entrance. Vanessa Reed stepped out first, already reviewing financial reports on her tablet. Behind her came 10-year-old Sophie, wearing oversized headphones and clutching a sketchbook against her chest. "You'll stay outside the conference room," Vanessa said gently. "It won't take long." Sophie nodded without looking up. Her regular caregiver had canceled that morning, and every backup plan had fallen apart. Bringing her to work had become the only option. An assistant placed a bottle of water beside the girl. "If you need anything, just tell me." Again, Sophie nodded. For nearly 20 minutes, she sat quietly, drawing tiny houses beneath enormous trees, while executives passed by without much notice. Then the fire alarm test began. The first sharp tone echoed through the hallway. Sophie flinched. The second blast came louder. Her breathing changed instantly. People continued walking, accustomed to scheduled alarm tests. Doors opened and closed. Someone laughed inside the conference room. Another alarm sounded. Sophie pressed both hands over her headphones. Her sketchbook slipped onto the floor. She stood abruptly and hurried down the corridor without anyone realizing she had left. By the time Vanessa's meeting paused for the drill announcement, Sophie had already disappeared. Meanwhile, Caleb heard the alarm from the lower service hallway. He checked the panel readings one final time before noticing something unusual. Small footsteps. Fast. Uneven. He looked toward the storage corridor just in time to see a little girl disappear behind a heavy supply room door. A second later, click. The lock engaged. Caleb approached slowly. He didn't touch the handle. Instead, he crouched beside the closed door. "It's okay," he said softly. No answer. Only quick, frightened breathing from inside. A security guard rounded the corner. "There you are," the guard said. "Kid ran in there?" Caleb nodded. "I'll get her." The guard reached for the handle. Caleb gently stopped him. "Please don't. We have to clear the hallway. And we'll do that. The faster we pull her out, the faster she'll panic." The guard frowned. "You know her?" "No." "Then how do you know?" Caleb listened quietly. The rapid breathing, the silence between each breath, the tiny sound of something sliding across the floor. "I don't," he admitted, "but I know fear." The guard hesitated. Another alarm echoed through the building. Inside the storage room came a muffled sob. Caleb slowly removed the old yellow flashlight from his tool belt. Instead of shining it through the crack beneath the door, he pointed the beam toward the opposite wall so only a soft circle of warm light reflected across the floor inside. No harsh brightness, no sudden movement, just a gentle glow. "My name's Caleb," he said. "You don't have to open the door. We can just sit here until you're ready." The crying didn't stop, but it became quieter. After a long moment, a small voice finally whispered from the other side. "Can you keep the light on?" Caleb smiled, though she couldn't see him. "I wasn't planning to turn it off." Several floors above them, Vanessa stepped into the hallway and discovered the empty chair outside the conference room. The sketchbook still lay open on the floor. Her heart sank. "Sophie?" No answer. Then she began to run. Her heels echoed across the polished hallway as employees stepped aside. She called Sophie's name once, then louder the second time. Every empty corner tightened the knot in her chest. An assistant caught up beside her. "We've checked the lobby. She's not there." A nurse pointed toward the service wing. "I thought I saw a little girl head that way after the alarm." Vanessa didn't hesitate. She pushed through the double doors separating the executive offices from the maintenance corridors, a part of the building she had rarely entered. The walls lost their polished artwork, replaced by exposed pipes, supply carts, and the faint smell of machine oil. Halfway down the corridor, she heard a voice. Low, steady, patient. "That's right. Just breathe with me." She slowed. The security guard standing nearby raised a finger, asking for silence. Vanessa looked past him. Caleb was sitting on the concrete floor outside a storage room. His toolbox rested beside him, unopened. The old yellow flashlight lay on the ground between him and the door, its beam reflecting softly against the opposite wall instead of shining directly inside. He wasn't trying to unlock the door. He wasn't demanding answers. He was simply waiting. "You don't have to come out yet," Caleb said. "We're not in a hurry." Another long pause. Then the tiny voice returned. "The noise hurts." "I know." "You do?" "I know loud sounds can make the whole world feel too big." Silence followed. Caleb tapped a wrench gently against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. A slow, even rhythm. "If the alarms are loud," he continued, "you can listen to this instead. Tap, tap, tap." The frantic breathing behind the door gradually matched the rhythm. Vanessa stood frozen. She had spent years searching for specialists, therapists, and programs that might help Sophie through moments like this. Yet a maintenance technician, whom her daughter had never mentioned before, seemed to know exactly what to do. "Mr. Brooks," Vanessa said carefully. He looked over his shoulder. His expression remained calm. "She's safe. I need to see my daughter." "You will." The answer wasn't disrespectful. It was gentle. "But if we rush her now—" He let the sentence trail away. Vanessa understood. For the first time in months, someone wasn't trying to force Sophie through her fear. They were meeting her inside it. The alarm finally stopped. The building settled into quiet. Caleb picked up the flashlight and adjusted its angle just slightly, keeping the warm circle of light steady beneath the door. "You hear that?" he asked. "The loud part's over." Nothing. Then, "Really? Really?" Another few seconds passed. A tiny hand appeared beneath the door, reaching toward the light without crossing the threshold. Caleb didn't move closer. He simply slid the flashlight forward until the beam rested beside her fingers. "It's yours until you're ready." Vanessa watched the little hand curl around the edge of the flashlight. No one spoke. No one rushed. The storage room remained closed, yet somehow it no longer felt like a prison. A minute later, the lock clicked. The door opened only a few inches. Sophie stood inside with tear-stained cheeks, clutching the yellow flashlight against her chest. She looked first at Caleb. Only then did she notice her mother. Vanessa instinctively stepped forward. "Honey." Sophie didn't move. Her eyes dropped to the flashlight. Then she quietly asked Caleb, "Can you come with me?" The question hung in the silent hallway. Vanessa felt every pair of nearby eyes shift toward her. For the first time, she realized the choice wasn't hers alone. It belonged to the frightened little girl standing in the doorway, and to the quiet man who somehow had already earned the trust she had spent months trying to rebuild. Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at Vanessa before he looked back at Sophie. "Only if your mom says it's okay." Sophie slowly lifted her eyes toward Vanessa. For a heartbeat, mother and daughter simply stared at each other. Vanessa swallowed the lump in her throat. "It's okay." Only then did Caleb stand. He didn't reach for Sophie's hand. He simply walked beside her at the pace she chose. Sophie stepped into the hallway, clutching the yellow flashlight with one hand while lightly holding the sleeve of Caleb's work shirt with the other. It wasn't the grip of a frightened child clinging to safety anymore. It was the quiet confidence of someone who believed she would not be hurried. Vanessa walked on Sophie's other side. None of them spoke. The silence itself felt fragile. When they reached the executive hallway, Sophie finally released Caleb's sleeve and handed him the flashlight. "Thank you." He smiled gently. "You did the hard part. I was scared." "I know. I thought the sound would never stop." "It always stops." She looked down at the flashlight, but the light stayed. Caleb's expression softened. It was supposed to. Vanessa noticed the way he spoke, not like someone trying to impress a child, but like someone honoring a promise only he understood. An assistant approached carefully. "The conference is ready whenever you are, Ms. Reed." Vanessa barely heard her. She was watching Sophie. Normally, after a panic episode, her daughter refused eye contact for hours. Today, she quietly picked up her sketchbook. She even tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, something she only did when she began feeling safe again. Before leaving, Sophie looked back. "Can I see Mr. Brooks again?" Vanessa hesitated. We'll see." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. Caleb clipped the flashlight back onto his belt and nodded politely. "I should get back to work." As he disappeared into the service corridor, one of the nurses smiled. "I've never seen her recover that quickly." The security guard shook his head. "I was ready to break the door open." "You would have made it worse," the nurse replied quietly. Neither of them realized Vanessa had heard every word. Later that afternoon, she stopped outside the maintenance office. Through the small window, she saw Caleb kneeling beside an elderly resident's wheelchair, tightening a loose brake while joking about Cleveland weather. The old man laughed. Caleb laughed with him. There were no supervisors nearby, no cameras, no audience. When he finished, the resident tried to slip a folded $20 bill into his hand. Caleb gently pushed it back. "Buy yourself a slice of pie instead." The old man chuckled. "Yeah, you never let anyone thank you." "You just did." Caleb picked up his toolbox and headed toward another work order before anyone could say another word. Vanessa remained outside the doorway. She had expected to find a man who knew how to calm frightened children. Instead, she was beginning to see someone who quietly cared for everyone around him without asking for recognition. She walked away before he noticed her. Inside the toolbox, the old yellow flashlight bumped softly against a wrench as Caleb crossed the hallway. The faded inscription remained hidden beneath years of scratches. No one, not Vanessa, not Sophie, not anyone else in the building, yet knew why he carried that light everywhere he went. Or why, every single time his phone vibrated, he stopped whatever he was doing to check it immediately, even if it was only for a second. That tiny habit seemed ordinary. One day, it would explain everything. The following Monday, Reed Residential Care slipped back into its familiar rhythm. Breakfast trays rolled through quiet hallways. Nurses exchanged shift reports over steaming coffee. Volunteers arranged fresh flowers in the lobby, while soft piano music drifted through hidden ceiling speakers. For most people, it felt like another ordinary morning. For Sophie, it was the first time she had asked to come back. Vanessa noticed it before they even reached the entrance. Instead of resisting, Sophie quietly unbuckled her seatbelt and climbed out of the SUV carrying the same sketchbook tucked under her arm. "You feeling okay?" Vanessa asked. Sophie nodded. "The alarms aren't today," No. Another pause. Is Mr. Brooks working? Vanessa looked at her daughter, surprised by how naturally the question came. I suppose he is. Sophie didn't say another word, but her shoulders relaxed. Inside the maintenance shop, Caleb was organizing bins of electrical parts before the morning work orders arrived. Every screw, washer, and connector sat in neatly labeled drawers. He believed that when life became chaotic, small things deserved order. His phone buzzed. He checked it immediately. Zoe, don't forget my bridge after work. A smile spread across his face. Caleb wouldn't miss it. He slipped the phone away just as Raymond Pike entered the room carrying a clipboard. You spent 40 extra minutes on an unassigned resident last Friday. The wheelchair brake was failing. It wasn't on your schedule. It is now. Raymond sighed. You're a good technician, Brooks. The compliment sounded almost uncomfortable. But if you ever want to move into management, stop solving every problem you happen to see. Caleb closed his toolbox. I don't usually find the problems. They find me. Raymond shook his head and walked away. One day that attitude is going to cost you. Caleb watched him disappear into the hallway before quietly returning to work. An hour later, he was replacing batteries in emergency smoke detectors when laughter echoed from the corridor. Small footsteps followed. Dad, slower! Zoe burst through the maintenance doorway carrying a cardboard model bridge almost as wide as she was. Loretta followed behind, smiling apologetically. School starts late today, she explained. She insisted on showing you. Caleb's face lit up. Let's see what we've got. Zoe proudly placed the bridge on the workbench. It finally stands by itself. It does. But one side keeps wobbling. Caleb crouched beside her. What happens if we rush the repair? It falls. And if we slow down? She grinned. We fix the right piece. He handed her a tiny screwdriver. Show me. From the hallway, Sophie had stopped walking. Vanessa nearly bumped into her. What is it? Sophie pointed silently through the open doorway. Inside, Caleb wasn't fixing the bridge himself. He was letting Zoe figure it out, offering only small hints and patient encouragement. You've got it, he said. I don't. You do. Another careful turn of the screw. The bridge stood perfectly straight. Zoe threw both arms around her father's neck. I knew you'd know. Caleb laughed. No. I knew you'd figure it out. Vanessa felt something tighten in her chest. She couldn't remember the last time she had watched a parent praise effort instead of results. Before she could speak, Sophie quietly stepped into the room. Hi, Mr. Brooks. Caleb turned, pleasantly surprised. Morning, Sophie. She looked toward Zoe's bridge. It's beautiful. Zoe smiled. Thanks. For a few seconds, the two girls simply admired the model together. Neither seemed nervous. Neither needed adults to fill the silence. Vanessa stood at the doorway watching a friendship begin in the most ordinary way imaginable. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, it frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. The days that followed settled into a quiet routine. Whenever Vanessa had to spend long hours at Reed Residential Care, Sophie asked the same question before leaving the house. Will Mr. Brooks be working today? Vanessa always answered honestly. If he's scheduled. She tried not to read too much into it. Children formed unexpected attachments all the time, she reminded herself. Still, something about this one felt different. It wasn't excitement. It was relief. Sophie no longer walked into the building staring at the floor. She glanced toward the maintenance hallway first, almost as if checking that a familiar lighthouse still stood where she'd last seen it. Caleb never invited her into his workspace. He never abandoned his duties. If Sophie wandered by with permission from Vanessa or one of the nurses, he simply found small jobs that busy hands could safely do. One afternoon, he handed her a box filled with loose nuts and bolts. "Think you can match these by size?" She studied them with complete concentration. Minutes later, Zoe arrived after school, dropping her backpack beside the workbench. "I'll race you," Zoe grinned. "There isn't a race," Sophie replied. "There is now." The girls laughed. Caleb looked up from repairing a cabinet hinge. "No throwing hardware." "We know," they answered together. By the end of the afternoon, hundreds of tiny pieces sat neatly arranged into perfect rows. "You two just saved me half an hour," Caleb said. Zoe smiled proudly. Sophie smiled even wider. No expensive toy had ever earned that expression. Across the hallway, Vanessa watched unnoticed through the narrow window in the door. She expected Caleb to entertain the girls. Instead, he treated them as capable people. He trusted them with real responsibility. Not difficult responsibility, just meaningful responsibility. When they finished, he thanked them exactly the way he thanked every employee who helped him. Neither girl looked like she had been spoken down to. Neither looked invisible. That evening, while driving home, Vanessa glanced toward the passenger seat. "You seemed happy today." Sophie looked out the window. "Mr. Brooks lets people help." "So do I." Sophie hesitated. "You tell people what to do." The words weren't cruel. They were simply honest. Vanessa tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She wanted to defend herself. Instead, she stayed quiet. At Reed Residential Care the next morning, Raymond Pike stood in the mechanical room reviewing maintenance expenses. He frowned as he flipped through Caleb's work reports. "You replaced 3 hallway bulbs that weren't on the request list." They were flickering. They still worked. They weren't safe. "You also repaired Mrs. Donnelly's cabinet. The door wouldn't close. That wasn't maintenance priority." Caleb calmly signed another completed work order. "She couldn't reach her medication." Raymond rubbed his forehead. "You keep solving problems nobody asked you to solve." Caleb met his eyes. "Most people don't ask because they think nobody has time." Before Raymond could answer, an elderly resident slowly crossed the lobby using a walker. One rubber tip slipped on the polished floor. Without thinking, Caleb stepped forward and steadied the walker before the woman lost her balance. "You okay, Mrs. Donnelly?" She smiled. "I am now." Raymond watched the brief exchange in silence. Nothing dramatic had happened. No applause, no audience. Just another interruption to Caleb's schedule. As Mrs. Donnelly continued down the hallway, Raymond shook his head. "You'll never finish your own work at this rate." Caleb looked after the elderly woman until she safely reached the elevator. "My work includes people," Raymond didn't reply. But from the second-floor balcony, another pair of eyes had witnessed the entire moment. Vanessa. She had begun paying attention to something she hadn't noticed before. Caleb never seemed to choose kindness because someone important was watching. He chose it because, in his mind, walking past someone who needed help simply wasn't an option. And somewhere deep inside, a question she hadn't expected refused to leave her. If this was who Caleb Brooks was every ordinary day, what kind of pain had taught him to live that way? A week later, winter settled even deeper over Cleveland. Snow clung to the rooftops of Reed Residential Care, while maintenance crews salted every sidewalk before sunrise. Inside the mechanical room, Caleb studied a maintenance report with a slight frown. 3 emergency alarm panels had logged delayed response times overnight. Not enough to trigger an official failure, enough to bother him. He grabbed his toolbox and headed for the basement control room. The building's oldest electrical equipment hummed behind thick steel doors. Dust coated the upper pipes, and decades of handwritten inspection dates faded across gray junction boxes. Caleb ran another diagnostic. The same delay appeared. 1.8 seconds. He tested another panel. Again. 1.8 seconds. He scribbled the numbers into a small notebook he always carried. Something wasn't right. Later that morning, he knocked on Raymond Pike's office door. "You got a minute?" Raymond barely looked up from his computer. "What is it?" "I think the emergency alarm system is developing a response delay." Raymond sighed. "How serious?" "I'm not sure yet." "Then why are you here?" Caleb placed the notebook on the desk. "I'd like permission to inspect the entire system." Raymond flipped through the pages. "Do you know what replacing that equipment would cost?" "No." "I do." He closed the notebook. "And until you know there's an actual failure, we're not shutting down half this campus because you're chasing numbers. It's only a request to inspect. It's a request that leads to invoices." Caleb remained calm. "If I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to say so. And if you're right, then we'll be glad we caught it early." Raymond slid the notebook back across the desk. "File a routine observation. No priority status. No disruption. Meeting over." Caleb picked up the notebook without another argument. Outside the office, one of the electricians caught up with him. "What did he say?" "The usual." The electrician laughed quietly. "You always bring bad news too early." "I'd rather be early than late." He headed back downstairs. By lunch, he had already documented the same delay on 3 additional panels. None had failed. Yet. Meanwhile, upstairs, Sophie sat quietly in the maintenance room while Zoe finished homework at the workbench. Caleb handed them 2 containers. Washers in one, screws in the other. No cheating. "There isn't a wrong way," Zoe joked. "There is if you mix quarter inch with metric," Caleb replied with a grin. The girls laughed. Sophie carefully lined every screw into perfect rows. After several minutes, she glanced toward Caleb. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yeah?" "How do you know when something's broken?" He looked up from the alarm panel he was repairing. "Usually it tells you." "What if it doesn't?" He smiled thoughtfully. "Then you pay attention to the little things." "The little things?" A strange noise. A loose bolt. A light that flickers. They seem small, but they're usually trying to warn you before something bigger happens. Sophie looked down at the tiny screws in her hands. "I think people do that too." Caleb paused. "I think you're right." Neither of them realized Vanessa had stopped outside the open doorway just in time to hear those words. She didn't interrupt. She simply watched her daughter smiling over a tray of ordinary hardware while Caleb quietly repaired another piece of aging equipment. For the first time in months, Sophie wasn't merely calmer. She was curious. She was talking. She was beginning to trust the world again. Across the hall, Raymond walked past carrying a folder marked Capital Improvement Budget. He glanced through the doorway, then continued without slowing. The maintenance reports remained buried inside his briefcase. The delayed alarms remained classified as routine observations. And deep beneath the building, hidden behind concrete walls and aging electrical panels, the system Caleb had tried to warn everyone about, continued counting down toward a failure no one else had yet learned to see. The next afternoon, a thick envelope landed on Raymond Pike's desk. Across the front, in Caleb's neat handwriting, were 4 simple words. Emergency System Inspection Request. Inside were 3 pages of measurements, photographs, and panel response times collected over several days. Caleb had highlighted the same delay appearing in different parts of the building, each one small enough to ignore on its own, but impossible to dismiss when viewed together. Raymond read the first page, then the second. By the third, he closed the folder with a quiet sigh. A capital improvement audit was only 2 weeks away. Any major safety recommendation would force outside inspections, delay expansion plans, and push millions of dollars in renovation approvals into the following quarter. He picked up the phone. "Brooks, my office." A few minutes later, Caleb stepped inside carrying nothing but his notebook. "You wanted to see me?" Raymond tapped the inspection request. "You've documented 4 different panels." "5 now." Raymond frowned. "5? I found another delay this morning in Building C. You understand what happens if this becomes an official safety report? It gets investigated. It becomes public. If necessary." Raymond leaned back in his chair. Sometimes leadership means knowing when not to create panic. Caleb answered quietly. "I don't want panic. I want repairs." Raymond folded his hands. "Rewrite this as a maintenance observation." "It already is. I mean, remove the recommendation for immediate replacement." Caleb didn't touch the folder. "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because I signed it." The room fell silent. Raymond studied him for several seconds. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Caleb shook his head gently. "No. The equipment is." When he walked out, the report remained exactly as he had written it. Late that afternoon, Vanessa crossed the lobby after finishing a board meeting. She noticed Caleb kneeling beside an elderly resident whose oxygen cart had caught on a loose strip of carpet. "Easy now, Mr. Ellis." The old man chuckled. "I swear this thing likes embarrassing me." Caleb crouched without hesitation, tightened the loose transition strip with 2 screws from his pocket, then tested it twice before helping the man continue. "You carry screws around just in case?" Mr. Ellis asked with a smile. "I've learned little things become big things if you wait." Vanessa heard the sentence. It sounded strangely familiar. Little things. Warnings. She remembered Sophie repeating almost those exact words at dinner the night before. "Mr. Brooks says people tell you they're hurting before they break." At the time, Vanessa had smiled politely. Now the words lingered. She watched Caleb stand, brush the dust from one knee, and continue down the hallway before anyone had the chance to thank him. No supervisor had assigned that repair. No report would ever mention it. Yet someone might walk safely across that strip for years because he had stopped. That evening, Caleb returned home carrying groceries in one arm and his toolbox in the other. Zoe met him at the front door with cardboard, glue sticks, and a ruler spread across the kitchen table. "My bridge passed the weight test." "It did?" "It held 12 textbooks." Caleb laughed. "That's stronger than my first one." "You built one?" "When I was your age." "Were you good at it?" He smiled while hanging his jacket by the door. "I made every mistake first." Loretta watched the 2 of them from the stove, quietly stirring a pot of chicken soup. For a few precious minutes, the little house felt warm enough to make the winter disappear. Then Caleb's phone vibrated. A work email. His smile faded as he opened it. Subject: Alarm inspection request. Deferred pending budget review. He read the message twice. Without saying a word, he slipped the phone into his pocket. Across the table, Zoe noticed the change in his face. Bad news. Caleb forced a gentle smile. Not tonight. He picked up a bottle of glue and leaned over the bridge beside his daughter. But as snow drifted past the kitchen window, his thoughts remained beneath Reed Residential Care, where 5 delayed alarm panels were still waiting for someone besides him to believe they mattered. By Friday morning, another thin layer of snow covered the parking lot. Caleb arrived before sunrise, as he always did. The building was still quiet, except for the hum of boilers waking up for another cold day. He unlocked the maintenance office, poured himself a cup of coffee, and checked the overnight system logs before taking off his coat. Another delay. Panel C14. 2.1 seconds this time. His brow tightened. It wasn't getting better. It was getting worse. He copied the new numbers into his notebook, then walked straight to the basement control room. One by one, he tested every affected panel again. The results matched the overnight report almost perfectly. He took photographs, recorded timestamps, printed another summary. When he reached Raymond's office, the operations director barely looked up. "You've got another report?" "I've got more evidence." Raymond accepted the papers with visible impatience. "Brooks, we've already discussed this." "No, sir. We discussed the budget. This system still passes inspection." "Barely. It passes." Caleb rested both hands on the folder. "If a delay keeps growing, waiting for it to fail isn't prevention." Raymond sighed. "The auditors arrive next week." "I know. And if they see this, they'll tell us to replace it. They'll freeze every expansion project we've planned for months." Caleb remained calm. "My job isn't protecting projects. It's protecting people." For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Raymond slid the folder into a desk drawer. "I'll review it." Caleb nodded politely. "I hope you do." As he left the office, Raymond didn't notice that the drawer remained closed. The report would never be read. Later that afternoon, Caleb climbed a ladder near the chapel to replace a faulty ceiling light. Below him, Sophie and Zoe sat on the floor with coloring books, while Loretta chatted with several residents waiting for an afternoon music program. "You missed a spot," Zoe teased. "I did that on purpose," Caleb answered, "so I'd have to come back." Sophie smiled quietly. She had begun smiling more often lately. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for Vanessa to notice. The CEO stood across the lobby finishing a conversation with board members when she caught sight of the small group. Her daughter wasn't hiding behind headphones. She wasn't staring at the floor. She was laughing softly because Zoe had accidentally colored a blue squirrel instead of a gray one. Vanessa found herself smiling. One of the board members followed her gaze. "That's your daughter?" "Yes." "She seems happier." Vanessa answered without taking her eyes off Sophie. "She does." Then she noticed something else. Every few minutes, Caleb's phone vibrated. Every single time, no matter what he was doing, he stopped for only a second to check the screen. Sometimes it was a text, sometimes only a notification. But he never ignored it. Never. Even balanced on the ladder, he climbed down before looking. The habit seemed almost automatic. Later, as the music program ended, Vanessa crossed paths with Loretta near the coffee station. "You must be Caleb's mother." Loretta smiled warmly. "I am. You raised a remarkable man." The older woman looked toward her son, who was helping fold chairs after the event, even though it wasn't part of his job. I'd like to say I deserve the credit. You don't? Loretta's smile faded just enough to reveal an old sadness. Life taught him things no parent ever wants their child to learn. Before Vanessa could ask what she meant, Caleb walked over. Ready to head home, Mom? Loretta nodded. As they turned toward the exit, Vanessa watched Caleb instinctively check his phone one more time. Nothing urgent, just a message from Zoe. Don't forget pancakes tomorrow. Relief crossed his face. He typed back immediately. Then he slipped the phone into his pocket and smiled as though answering that tiny message mattered just as much as any emergency call. Vanessa couldn't explain why that ordinary moment stayed with her. She only knew it felt connected somehow to the sadness that briefly crossed Loretta's face, the old yellow flashlight clipped to Caleb's belt, and the pain he never seemed willing to talk about. Saturday arrived wrapped in quiet snowfall. For the first time in weeks, Caleb had promised Zoe an entire day away from work. No overtime, no maintenance calls, just pancakes, the science fair, and whatever adventures a 9-year-old could imagine before bedtime. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and maple syrup. Loretta watched from the table as Zoe carefully flipped a pancake that landed halfway in the skillet. I'll count that as success, Caleb laughed. It stayed in the pan. Zoe grinned. You always lower the grading scale. I call it encouragement. For a little while, nothing existed outside their small home. No alarms, no reports, no unanswered questions. Just laughter echoing against warm kitchen walls. Then Caleb's phone buzzed. He glanced at it instantly. Not work, a weather alert. Winter storm warning. Heavy snow expected Sunday night. Strong winds possible. He locked the screen without another thought. Across town, Vanessa Reed sat in her home office reviewing next week's board agenda, while Sophie colored quietly beside the fireplace. One report caught Vanessa's attention. Regional Weather Advisory. The approaching storm was expected to bring freezing rain before heavy snowfall. She forwarded the notice to operations. Please verify emergency preparedness. Less than 5 minutes later, Raymond replied. Everything is fully operational. Vanessa accepted the answer. She had no reason not to. Late that afternoon, Caleb and Zoe carried her bridge project into the elementary school gymnasium. Children hurried between display tables while parents adjusted posters and taped down loose corners. This one? Caleb asked. Zoe nodded proudly. Together they placed the bridge beneath a handwritten sign. Engineering tomorrow. As Caleb adjusted one final support beam, another father nearby struggled with an elaborate volcano display, collapsing under its own weight. Without hesitation, Caleb walked over. Need another pair of hands? The man sighed with relief. I've needed one for an hour. Within minutes, Caleb reinforced the frame using spare wooden sticks and school glue. There. The volcano stood perfectly upright. I don't know how to thank you. Caleb smiled. Cheer for Zoe if she wins. When he returned, Zoe looked at him with amused eyes. You can't help everybody. He knelt beside her. No. But I can help the person standing in front of me. She tucked that answer away without another word. On Sunday evening, the sky turned the color of steel. Wind bent the bare trees outside Reed Residential Care, scattering powdery snow across empty sidewalks. Maintenance crews secured outdoor furniture while nurses checked emergency flashlights and backup blankets. Caleb arrived early for his shift. He paused beside the basement alarm panel. Another test. Another delay. 2.4 seconds. His jaw tightened. He opened his notebook. Every measurement showed the same pattern. Every day, slower than the last. He climbed upstairs, carrying the newest report. Raymond met him outside the operations office before he could knock. "I already know why you're here. The storm changes everything." "No, Brooks. It doesn't. The system still meets code. The weather won't care about code. It'll care whether the alarms work." Raymond folded his arms. "I've made my decision." Caleb looked through the office window toward families visiting loved ones before the storm arrived. Children hugged grandparents. Volunteers served coffee. Residents smiled as music drifted softly through the lobby. Hundreds of ordinary moments. Hundreds of people trusting the building around them. He looked back at Raymond. "I'm asking one last time." Raymond's expression hardened. "And I'm giving you one last answer." Caleb lowered the report. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked away with the folder still in his hands. Far above them, the first heavy snowflakes began striking the windows, and beneath the building, hidden behind concrete walls and aging electrical panels. The warning Caleb had tried so hard to prevent continued growing quietly stronger, waiting for the storm to expose what paperwork had chosen to ignore. When everyone else saw another maintenance worker, Sophie saw the man who stopped long enough to make her feel safe again. Sometimes the greatest difference in a person's life begins with someone who simply refuses to walk past their fear. This story reminds us that real strength isn't measured by titles or speeches. It shows itself in quiet actions that nobody is watching. Caleb never waited for recognition. He kept doing what was right because someone's safety mattered more than someone else's approval. Today, take a moment to notice one small problem you've been tempted to ignore. A loose step, a lonely neighbor, or a friend who's suddenly gone quiet. The next time life gives you that choice, remember what Caleb did. He paid attention before a small warning became a painful regret. Have you ever met someone like Caleb Brooks? Someone whose quiet actions changed lives without asking for credit? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And stay with us, because our next story begins with another ordinary moment that will change everything before anyone realizes what's happening.